Well, Fanalysis combines the analytics of fantasy football with the metrics of sports betting, and we find you the sharpest angles each week. And for those angles, we turn to a sports handicapper you can find on Twitter as Old Man Who Bets, Geoff Sheasby, who is celebrating Movember in the best way possible. Jeff.
Great to be back, Steve. This mustache continues to grow. We're growing it out for men's health and keeping men alive. So all good things.
All right. You're not darkening. That is actual growth right there. We're not adding any kind of influencing darkening there, huh?
No PEDs here. I've thought about the Just for Men Jet Black, but at the end of the day, this is all natural.
All right, so here we are in week 11 of the NFL season. We're really starting to see these contenders separate themselves away from the pretenders. But this matchup, one of your top plays of the week, is actually featuring two real legitimate contenders in Tennessee going up against the Baltimore Ravens. Are you surprised? This line at Tennessee +6 is one of the biggest lines of the week.
I think this is a super strong line here for Baltimore. -6, coming off a tough loss, of course, to the Patriots, who have been the definition of a roller coaster this year. But here we get, again, a strong line with a public fade opportunity. I think these public fade opportunities, especially in the back half of the season, are really key in the sense that there's always going to be variance in the NFL, and teams are very much, or the public is going to overreact to last week's results. Again, where we see Baltimore losing that game. Fact of the matter is, when we look under the hood here, we see two teams with very similar stats. When we look at yards per play and points per play on offense, Tennessee yards per play 5.9 compared to Baltimore's 5.5. A slight advantage for Tennessee. When we look at points per play, we see .435 for Tennessee, .430 for Baltimore. Very, very similar. We see a very similar trend on defense as well. Opponent yards per play for Tennessee, 5.8. For Baltimore, 5.1, slightly better on Baltimore. In terms of points per play, we see slightly better for Baltimore as well, .289 versus .380. So we see a solid advantage there on defense, a very similar slight lean for Tennessee on the offensive points. But again, that line strength at -6, and then taking into account some of these teams, who these teams have played, I think is going to be huge, Steve.
Well, actually, I think that's a great point, because we're at the point of the season now where strength of schedule is really a valuable, I guess, statistic to take a look at. How big of a role does strength of schedule play, especially now late in the season?
Yeah, I think strength of schedule is a key component here to kind of factor in the context of what these data points mean. You look at these, again, they're pretty similar on offense, slight advantage to the Baltimore on defense. But when we look at strength of schedule, we see that Tennessee has the 30th ranked strength of schedule, being one of the easiest according to TeamRanking.com's power rankings. The other side, we see Baltimore at number 5. That is a huge discrepancy, which automatically means that we need to be downgrading the Tennessee Titans stats and upgrading those in the Baltimore stats. So while they're similar on offense, that strength of schedule means that Tennessee was eating against some inferior opponents, where Baltimore was putting up similar numbers against stronger opponents. And when we look at the common opponents between these two teams, we see in 3 out of the 4 examples a big advantage for Baltimore. The first is going to be Houston. Tennessee beat them by 6. Baltimore beat them by 17. Advantage Baltimore. The second, we look at Pittsburgh. This is the one that doesn't favor the Ravens. Tennessee lost by 3. Baltimore lost by 4. But if we recall back to that game, Baltimore out-yardaged them by about 250 yards. I think there was a special teams touchdown and a bunch of turnovers that really crippled Baltimore. Of course, a great win for the Steelers, but nonetheless, thinking about the data, thinking about the edge here, I don't necessarily look at that as a terrible loss for Baltimore. The final 2, Cincinnati, Tennessee loses by 11. Baltimore wins by 24. The last one, Indianapolis, Tennessee loses by 17. Baltimore wins by 14. So that strength of schedule, I think, is huge. And again, putting into those numbers into context, we see similar stats. We see a far stronger schedule for Baltimore and a strong line from Vegas at -6. All signs point to Baltimore winning and covering this game.
Yeah, I think the common opponents is actually a really interesting stat line to take a closer look at when you see how they match up against some of those teams that know how to stop the run, because that's what both the Titans and the Ravens love to do, is keep the ball on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. I think the passing game, honestly, is underrated from the Titans, and I think that is a little bit of a concern with Baltimore's secondary, a little banged up. If you look at the stats, I believe from the last 16 games, calendar year, not necessarily season to season, from Tannehill, he's got some of the best numbers in the league. The last time I checked, it was something like 4,500 yards, 41 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, up there only with Patrick Mahomes and Drew Brees. So, really solid in that front. Funny to see a guy wash out of Miami because he can't play quarterback and then put up those kind of numbers. But nonetheless, I think this is a team game. Obviously, we're looking at 53 men on the roster and the data points that they're creating, not just one. And it seems like there's just too many points pointing towards Baltimore for them not to win and cover this game.
Flamed out after an Adam Gase offense didn't work for him. I wonder if that's what we're going to see out of Sam Darnold's career moving forward. But that's a story for another day. Let's take a look at the Bucs. They are 4-point favorites this week against the Rams. Tom Brady loves the spotlight. Does that bode well for him on Monday night?
I think it does, Steve. We got Brady and co. They looked absolutely fantastic last week after they came off one of the worst losses in Brady's career, against the Saints. Do they regress this week coming off that big win? Quite frankly, I don't think so. Brady on Monday Night Football, he's 18-7 as a starter. I don't have the spread stats in front of me on that, but nonetheless, he shows up when he needs to. He's a baller, and he's filled with an offense that loves to ball. Bruce Arians loves to air it out. Their offense only keeps getting more talented. They just brought Antonio Brown. He's been involved in week 1 and in week 2. And it just seems like this team keeps finding ways to gel together. When Fournette and Ronald Jones III are running well, obviously Ronald had that 98-yard touchdown last week. I think one of 4 individuals in NFL history to make a run that long. That really opens up the passing game. Brady's got the best passing crew he's ever had. Since maybe the 2007 Patriots. So if the run's working to open up a play action pass, this is a team that I don't think can be stopped. I suppose the only concern from here on this season is that they're 2-4 against the spread after the win. But nonetheless, I think the underlying metrics here, Steve, are going to give an edge to the Bucs.
Yeah, Brady and the rest of that team hopefully knows how to ratchet things up as they get a little bit closer to the end of the season, and that's obviously on the horizon. But when you take a look at against the spread, you see the Rams have been favored for 6 straight weeks, yet they only covered half the time. I wonder, do you think the sharp bettors are starting to be a little more cautious with the money they put on the Rams?
Yeah, this is a Rams team that honestly confuses me. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't, and it doesn't necessarily seem to be playing up to the competition or playing down to it. Nonetheless, we look under the hood here. We see a very similar yards per play for both of these offenses. The Rams are coming in at 5.8 yards per play. The Bucs 5.7. But when we look at points per play, there's a big discrepancy here, essentially showcasing that Tampa Bay can take care of the ball and score at a higher rate. 0.352 for the Rams offense, 0.458 for Tampa Bay, and that's very strong. That's on the upper echelon of the league, the best in the league. The Chiefs are hovering in the 0.5 range. So the Bucs are right there. We look at the other side of the ball, pretty good things as well, very similar. The Rams are looking at 0.48 of the yards per play allowed. The Bucs 0.49, obviously, 4.9. That's very similar. And the opponent per point per play is similar too, 0.301 versus 0.366. So both of those similar. Interestingly enough, when we look at the defensive efficiency stats from Football Outsiders, we do see a big jump up from Tampa Bay. They are ranked the #1 most efficient defense in the league. The Rams aren't bad in that component, but they're at number 8. But nonetheless, I think a similar stats, kind of an offensive and defensive side, is great. But at the end of the day, we do need to find a way, Steve, to put these into context.
Yeah. Okay, context is really important, but trends are also kind of important as well. This is the 2nd straight week the team that beat Seattle, a good team, is an underdog. And that was the Bills last week, who ended up not covering on a ridiculous end of the game play. But do you see something like that as something you take a measurement of? A team that's coming off of a big win like the Rams had this last week against Seattle?
I would say yes and no. Naturally it's a letdown spot, but the Bucs also came off a big win. In terms of at least the box score, right? So that's not necessarily something I'm overly concerned at, because I do believe that those match up. When we look at the strength of schedules of these two teams here, similar to what we just talked about with the Titans and the Ravens, we see a very similar split here. The Rams, again, similar stats, offensive and defensively, a little bit better at times, but they've got the 20th ranked strength of schedule. The Bucs, on the other hand, number 4. So we must upgrade those Bucs numbers. We must downgrade those Rams numbers. And I think the Bucs just keep looking better week over week as this offense continues to gel. The defense is dominant. Excuse me. I love the Bucs here at -4.
All right, well, that is a look at his top plays of the week. He is, by the way, saving one of his top plays of the week for our Jets-Giants segment. Make sure you check it out to see which game he's taking a closer look at. For Geoff Sheasby, I'm Steve Overmyer. This is Fanalysis.